The flickering neon sign was the only beacon of life for miles along this desolate stretch of highway. Last Chance Truck Stop, it proclaimed in buzzing red letters, some of which sputtered and threatened to go dark at any moment. I'd been driving for 14 hours straight, and the words "last chance" seemed to speak directly to my weary bones and heavy eyelids. I eased my rig into the vast, empty parking lot, the gravel crunching under my tires. The solitude was both a relief and slightly unnerving. Usually these places were bustling hubs of activity, even in the dead of night. Truckers swapping stories over lukewarm coffee, locals seeking refuge from their own four walls, maybe even the occasional drifter looking for a warm place to rest. But tonight, it was just me and my 18-wheeler. As I cut the engine, the sudden silence was almost deafening. I sat there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. That's when I noticed it, a single car parked at the far end of the lot. It was an old model, maybe from the 90s, with faded paint and a slightly crooked front bumper. Something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I shook off the feeling. "You're just tired, Jake," I muttered to myself, reaching for the door handle. "A strong cup of joe and you'll be right as rain." The cool night air hit me as I climbed down from the cab, bringing with it the scent of diesel and distant rain. I stretched, my joints popping in protest after hours of sitting. That's when I saw them, long, jagged scratches running along the passenger side door of my truck. My heart rate picked up as I ran my fingers over the marks. They were deep, cutting through the paint to the metal beneath. These weren't the kind of scratches you get from a careless driver in a parking lot. These looked deliberate. I glanced around the empty lot, suddenly feeling exposed. The abandoned car seemed to loom larger in my peripheral vision. Was it just my imagination, or had it been parked closer to the building before? Forcing myself to take a deep breath, I tried to think rationally. The scratches could have happened any time during my long haul. Maybe I'd sideswiped a low-hanging branch without noticing. It didn't mean anything sinister was going on. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. I made my way towards the truck stop's main building, my boots crunching on the gravel with each step. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness of the night. As I approached the entrance, I noticed a 24-hour service sign hanging crookedly in the window. The glass door creaked as I pulled it open, a small bell jingling half-heartedly to announce my arrival. The interior was bathed in the sickly glow of fluorescent lights. Rows of snacks and travel essentials lined the shelves, covered in a thin layer of dust. The place had clearly seen better days. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. No response. I made my way to the coffee station, the linoleum floor squeaking under my feet. The coffee pot was full, steam rising from its surface. Someone had to be around to have made it, right? As I poured myself a cup, movement caught my eye. I turned, expecting to see an employee emerging from a back room. Instead, I found myself staring at a bulletin board near the restrooms. Missing person flyers covered nearly every inch of the cork surface. Some were yellowed with age, others looked freshly printed. But what made my blood run cold was the sheer number of them. Dozens of faces stared back at me, their eyes seeming to plead for help. I stepped closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity. Many of the missing were truckers, identified by their CB handles. Smokey Joe, Night Owl, Carolina Red. Names I'd heard crackling over the radio during long night drives. My hands shook as I lifted my coffee cup to my lips, the bitter liquid scalding my tongue. This wasn't right. How could so many people go missing in one area without it making national news? A loud bang from the back of the store made me jump, hot coffee sloshing over my hand. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Anyone back there?" Silence. I set my cup down on a nearby shelf, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But something held me back. If someone was in trouble, I couldn't just walk away. Cautiously, I made my way towards the source of the sound. A door marked "Atelier Employees Only" stood slightly ajar. I pushed it open, wincing at the creaking hinges. "Hey, I'm not trying to cause any trouble," I said, peering into the darkness beyond. "I just wanted to make sure everything's okay." My hand fumbled along the wall, searching for a light switch. When I finally found it, I almost wished I hadn't. The back room was a scene of chaos. Shelves had been overturned, their contents strewn across the floor. A desk in the corner was covered in papers, many of which looked like official police reports. And there, in the center of it all, was a large dark stain on the concrete floor. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? Any second now, someone would jump out with a camera, laughing at the trucker who'd fallen for their elaborate prank. But as the seconds ticked by and the room remained still, a terrifying reality began to sink in. This was no joke. Something very wrong was happening here. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out, had to call for help. My truck suddenly seemed miles away. As I turned to leave, the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Darkness enveloped me, broken only by the faint glow of the neon sign outside. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I'd driven through midnight snowstorms and navigated winding mountain roads. I could handle a power outage. Using my phone's flashlight, I made my way back through the store. The bell above the door had never sounded so sweet as it did when I pushed my way outside. The cool night air hit me like a slap to the face, clearing some of the fog from my mind. I needed to get to my truck, to the CB radio. I'd call for help and then get the hell out of here. I was halfway across the parking lot when I saw it. The abandoned car was now parked directly behind my truck, blocking me in. My blood turned to ice in my veins. How? I hadn't heard an engine, hadn't seen headlights. It was as if the vehicle had moved on its own. A low, rumbling sound filled the air. At first I thought it was thunder, but as it grew louder, I realized it was coming from the car. The engine roared to life, headlights blazing to full brightness. I stood frozen, caught in the glare like a deer on the highway. The driver's side door opened slowly, a dark figure emerging from within. In that moment, survival instinct kicked in. I ran, no destination in mind except away from the truck stop, away from my rig, away from whatever nightmare I'd stumbled into. The sound of footsteps crunching on gravel followed me. I didn't dare look back, focusing instead on the road ahead. The yellow line down the center became my lifeline, guiding me through the darkness. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept running. How long had it been? Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to lose all meaning in the vastness of the night. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing larger as they approached. I waved my arms frantically, praying it wasn't another phantom vehicle. The car slowed as it neared, and I could have wept with relief when I saw the words, "State Police," emblazoned on its side. "Are you all right, sir?" the officer asked as he stepped out of the cruiser. The words tumbled out of me in a rushed, breathless stream. The empty truck stop, the scratches on my rig, the missing person posters, the chaos in the back room, the moving car. It all sounded insane, even to my own ears. The officer listened patiently, his face a mask of professional concern. When I finished, he placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Let's go take a look, shall we?" he said, gesturing for me to get in the car. As we drove back towards the last chance truck stop, relief washed over me. Whatever had happened back there, I wasn't alone anymore. We'd get to the bottom of this. But as the truck stop came into view, my relief turned to confusion, then to horror. The parking lot was full. Trucks of all sizes were neatly parked in rows, their drivers milling about or heading into the brightly lit store. My rig sat where I'd left it, no scratches on its side, no mysterious car blocking it in. "Looks pretty normal to me," the officer said, pulling into a parking space. I stared in disbelief, my mind struggling to reconcile what I was seeing with what I'd experienced. Had it all been a hallucination? Some kind of waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion? As we stepped out of the cruiser, the officer turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome back to the last chance truck stop," he said, his voice taking on an odd tone. "We've been waiting for you, Jake." A chill ran down my spine as I realized my fatal mistake. I'd never told him my name. Story 2. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a face as pale as moonlight. Lifeless eyes stared back at me, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. 12 years on the force hadn't prepared me for this. But let me back up. My name's Mike Callahan, and I've been a state trooper with the Highway Patrol for over a decade. I've seen my fair share of strange things on these lonely stretches of asphalt, but nothing quite like what happened that night. It was a Tuesday, just past 11 p.m. I was cruising down a desolate stretch of Highway 16, about 30 miles outside of Millbrook. The kind of night where the darkness seems to swallow everything beyond your headlights. Radio was quiet, and I was looking forward to the end of my shift in a couple of hours. That's when I spotted the car, a sleek black sedan doing at least 90 in a 65 zone. I flipped on my lights and siren, fully expecting them to slow down and pull over. But they didn't. If anything, they sped up. My adrenaline kicked in as I radioed it in. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14. I'm in pursuit of a black sedan. License plate Alpha Bravo Charlie 729. Heading east on Highway 16, mile marker 42. Copy that, Unit 14. Proceed with caution. Backup is en route." I pushed my cruiser harder, the engine roaring as I gained on the sedan. For nearly 10 minutes, we raced through the night. The road was empty except for us, the hills on either side casting long shadows across the pavement. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sedan's brake lights flared to life. They pulled over to the shoulder, gravel crunching under their tires. I stopped about 20 feet behind them, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. High-speed pursuits always left me on edge, and this one had been particularly intense. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cruiser, the cool night air hitting my face. "Dispatch, suspect has pulled over. I'm approaching the vehicle now." "Copy that, Unit 14. Be advised, backup is still 5 minutes out." I approached the sedan cautiously, my right hand resting on my holstered weapon. The car's windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. As I got closer, I noticed there was no movement from within, no shifting in the seat, no hands visible on the steering wheel. Something wasn't right. I tapped on the driver's side window with my flashlight. "Driver, roll down your window and show me your hands." No response. I repeated the command, louder this time, still nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. In all my years on the job, I'd never encountered a situation quite like this. My instincts were screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. I tried the door handle. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I pulled it open slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness of the car's interior. That's when I saw him. The driver was a man in his mid-30s, dressed in a crisp suit. His head was tilted back against the headrest, eyes wide open and staring blankly at the ceiling. His skin was pale, almost gray in the harsh light of my flashlight. "Sir, can you hear me?" I reached out to check for a pulse, my fingers trembling slightly. His skin was cold to the touch, and I couldn't feel even the faintest heartbeat. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, I need EMS at my location immediately. Driver is unresponsive, possible 10-29. "Copy that, Unit 14. EMS is being dispatched now." I stepped back from the vehicle, my mind racing. How could this be? The car had been speeding, engaged in a high-speed chase just minutes ago. How could the driver be dead? That's when I heard it. A faint sound coming from the back seat. I froze, straining my ears. There it was again, a soft rustling like fabric against leather. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone or something was in the back seat. I raised my flashlight, slowly panning it across the rear windows. The tint made it nearly impossible to see inside, but I could have sworn I saw a shadow move. "This is the state police," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "If there's anyone in the vehicle, make yourself known now." Silence. I circled around to the other side of the car, my flashlight beam never leaving the windows. As I reached for the rear door handle, a chill ran down my spine. Every instinct I had was telling me to wait for backup, but curiosity and duty pushed me forward. I pulled the door open in one swift motion, my flashlight illuminating the back seat. Empty. I blinked, confused. I was sure I'd heard something. I leaned in, sweeping my light across the floorboards and under the seats. Nothing. No sign that anyone had been back here at all. As I straightened up, a flicker of movement caught my eye in the rearview mirror. I spun around, my hand flying to my weapon. There was nothing behind me but the empty road and my patrol car. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Unit 14, this is dispatch. Backup is 1 minute out. What's your status?" I took a shaky breath. "Dispatch, situation is unclear. Driver appears to be deceased, but..." I hesitated, not sure how to explain what I'd experienced. "I thought I heard something in the back seat, but the vehicle appears to be empty." "Copy that, Unit 14. Stand by." I turned back to the car, determined to get a better look at the driver. As I approached the open driver's side door, I noticed something odd. The man's suit jacket, which had been neatly buttoned when I first saw him, was now open. I frowned, leaning in closer. That's when I saw it, a dark stain spreading across his white shirt, centered right over his heart. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a medical emergency. This was a crime scene. I backed away from the vehicle, drawing my weapon. "Dispatch, be advised. We have a possible homicide. I need additional units and CSI at my location." "Copy that, Unit 14. All available units are being redirected to your location." I scanned the area around me, suddenly acutely aware of how exposed I was. The lonely stretch of highway seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, the darkness beyond my flashlight beam hiding who knows what. That's when I heard it again, the rustling sound. But this time it wasn't coming from the car. It was coming from the tall grass at the side of the road, just beyond the reach of my light. "This is the state police," I called out, my voice sounding thin in the vast darkness. "Come out with your hands up." The rustling stopped abruptly. For a moment, the only sound was the pounding of my own heart in my ears. Then, without warning, a figure burst from the grass. In the split second before it disappeared into the darkness on the other side of the road, my flashlight caught a glimpse of a pale face and wild eyes. I gave chase, my boots pounding on the asphalt. But as I reached the other side of the road, there was no sign of the figure. It had vanished into the night as quickly as it had appeared. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, and I saw the flashing lights of backup units in the distance. As they grew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced something beyond my comprehension. When my fellow officers arrived, I gave them a rundown of what had happened. They looked at me with a mix of concern and disbelief as I described the chase, the seemingly dead driver who had been alive minutes earlier, and the mysterious figure in the grass. As CSI began to process the scene, one of the detectives pulled me aside. "Mike, are you sure about what you saw? It's been a long night, and after a chase like that, adrenaline can play tricks on your mind." I shook my head. "I know what I saw, Dave. Something's not right here. That driver, he was alive when I started chasing him. And that figure in the grass, it was real. I'm telling you, there's more to this than meets the eye." Dave gave me a long look, then nodded slowly. "All right, Mike, we'll dig into it, but for now, why don't you head back to the station and get some rest? You've had one hell of a night." As I drove back to the station, my mind raced with questions. Who was the driver? How had he died so quickly, and who or what was that figure I saw? One thing was certain. This night would haunt me for a long time to come. In all my years on the force, I'd never encountered anything like this. And deep down, I had a feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger and much more terrifying than I could imagine. As I pulled into the station parking lot, I couldn't shake the image of those lifeless eyes staring back at me. Whatever had happened on that lonely stretch of highway, I was determined to get to the bottom of it. Because in this job, sometimes the things that go bump in the night are all too real, and sometimes they're just waiting for the right moment to strike. Story 3. The red and blue lights flashed in my rearview mirror, a stark contrast against the pitch-black highway. My heart sank. I hadn't been speeding, had I? As I pulled over onto the narrow shoulder, a sense of unease crept over me. Something about this didn't feel right. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves as I watched the patrol car come to a stop behind me. The headlights were blinding, making it impossible to see the officer as he stepped out of the vehicle. I lowered my window, feeling the cool night air rush in. "License and registration," a gruff voice demanded. I squinted, trying to make out the officer's face, but he remained just outside my field of vision, obscured by the glare of the flashlight he shone directly into my eyes. "Of course, officer," I replied, fumbling in the glove compartment for my documents. As I handed them over, I caught a glimpse of his uniform. It looked off somehow. The badge didn't catch the light the way it should, and the patches seemed faded and worn. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, his tone flat and emotionless. I shook my head. "No, sir, I don't believe I was speeding." He remained silent for an uncomfortably long time. I could hear the crackle of a radio, but it wasn't coming from his patrol car. It seemed to be coming from him. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered suddenly. My stomach churned. "May I ask why, officer?" I said, "Step out of the vehicle." His voice had an edge to it now, a hint of aggression that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Reluctantly, I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the door. As I stood up, I finally got a good look at the officer. He was tall and lean with a pale, almost gaunt face. His eyes were hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, at night, which struck me as odd. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," he instructed. As I complied, I noticed something else strange. There was no name tag on his uniform. Every police officer I'd ever encountered had worn one. "Officer," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "may I ask what this is about?" He didn't respond. Instead, I heard the unmistakable sound of handcuffs being unclipped from his belt. My heart began to race. "Wait," I protested. "I haven't done anything wrong. You haven't even told me why you pulled me over." His hand gripped my shoulder, spinning me around to face him. "I don't need a reason," he growled. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this man was not a real police officer. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was alone on a deserted highway with someone impersonating a cop, and things were about to get much worse if I didn't act. Without thinking, I shoved him hard and made a break for my car. He recovered quickly, grabbing at my jacket. I twisted away, feeling the fabric tear as I lunged for the driver's side door. "Stop right there!" he yelled, but I was already inside, slamming the door shut and fumbling with my keys. The engine roared to life just as he reached the window. He pounded on the glass, his face contorted with rage. I threw the car into drive and floored it, tires screeching as I pulled away. In my rearview mirror, I saw him sprint back to his vehicle. The lights flashed to life, and he peeled onto the highway in pursuit. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, pushing my old sedan to its limits. The speedometer crept past 90, then 100. The patrol car kept pace, its headlights filling my mirrors. I needed help, and fast. With one hand on the wheel, I grabbed my phone from the cup holder. No signal. Of course not. I was in the middle of nowhere, running from a fake cop with no way to call for help. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of black in the darkness. My mind raced, trying to remember the last town I'd passed. How far to the next one? Would I have enough gas to make it? A sharp crack pierced the air, followed by the unmistakable ping of metal on metal. He was shooting at me. The realization sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. This was no longer just about escaping, it was about surviving. I swerved, trying to make myself a harder target. The car behind me was gaining ground. In the distance, I saw a faint glow lights from an approaching vehicle. Hope surged within me. If I could just reach that car, maybe the driver could help. The glow grew brighter, resolving into a pair of headlights. It was a semi-truck lumbering down the highway towards us. I flashed my lights frantically, hoping to catch the driver's attention. As we drew closer, I could see the truck was taking up most of the road. I'd have to time this perfectly. Just before we were about to pass, I yanked the wheel hard to the right, skidding onto the shoulder. The fake cop car, too close behind me to react in time, swerved to avoid rear-ending me. In that split second, the truck driver must have realized something was wrong. The massive vehicle blared its horn, headlights illuminating the entire scene. The impersonator's car, caught between my sedan and the oncoming truck, spun out of control. I watched in my mirror as the patrol car careened off the road, rolling several times before coming to rest in a ditch. The truck screeched to a halt, its air brakes hissing in the sudden silence. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. I stumbled out, legs weak with relief and residual fear. The truck driver, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, rushed over to me. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "What the hell happened?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I pointed towards the wreckage of the fake patrol car. The truck driver's eyes widened as he took in the scene. "That ain't no real cop car," he muttered, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling this in. You just sit tight, okay?" I nodded numbly, sinking to the ground as the adrenaline began to wear off. As the truck driver spoke with the 911 dispatcher, I tried to process what had just happened. Who was that man? What would have happened if I hadn't gotten away? The question swirled in my mind, making me feel dizzy and nauseous. It felt like hours, but it was probably only about 20 minutes before we saw the flashing lights of real police cars approaching. As they pulled up, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. How could I be sure these were genuine officers? but as soon as the first officer stepped out of his car, the difference was clear. His uniform was crisp and professional, his badge gleaming in the flashing lights. He approached me with an air of calm authority that immediately put me at ease. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. I nodded, still a bit shaky. "I think so." As I recounted my story to the officer, more patrol cars and an ambulance arrived on the scene. EMTs checked me over, assuring me that aside from some bruises and scrapes, I was physically fine. The police searched the wrecked patrol car and found a treasure trove of evidence. Fake badges, various uniforms, and a collection of weapons were all discovered. The man himself was unconscious but alive, already in custody and on his way to the hospital under guard. As dawn began to break, casting a pale light over the highway, the officer who had taken my statement approached me again. "We've been able to identify the suspect," he said, his expression grim. "He's wanted in connection with several disappearances along this highway over the past year. You're incredibly lucky." The weight of those words hit me hard. I thought about all the what-ifs. What if I hadn't trusted my instincts? What if the truck hadn't come along when it did? "We'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement," the officer continued. "But first, is there someone we can call for you?" I thought about my family, my friends, how close I had come to never seeing them again. "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse. "Yes, there is." As I sat in the back of a real patrol car watching the sun rise over the highway, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Grateful to be alive, grateful for the truck driver who had unknowingly saved my life, and grateful for the real police officers who had arrived to help. But most of all, I was grateful for that little voice inside me that had said something wasn't right. From now on, I vowed, I would always listen to that voice. It might just save my life again someday. The highway stretched out before us as we drove towards the police station. No longer a dark and threatening place, but a road leading back to safety, back to my life. I had survived, and in doing so, helped catch a dangerous criminal. As harrowing as the experience had been, I knew that in some small way I had made the highways a little safer for everyone else. Story 4. The stench of rotting garbage was nothing compared to the horror we were about to uncover. What started as a routine midnight pickup would soon become the longest night of our lives. I've been a garbage collector for 15 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what we found in that dumpster. It was a Tuesday night, or rather, Wednesday morning. The clock on the dashboard of our garbage truck read 2:17 a.m. as my partner Mike and I pulled up to the back alley of Maple Street. The sodium streetlights cast an eerie orange glow over the row of dumpsters, their shadows stretching like long fingers across the cracked asphalt. "Your turn to hop out, newbie," Mike chuckled, his belly jiggling as he shifted the truck into park. I rolled my eyes. After 6 months on the job, I wasn't exactly new anymore, but Mike loved his little jokes. Yeah, keep your shirt on, old-timer," I retorted, grabbing my work gloves and hopping down from the cab. The night air was crisp, carrying the promise of autumn. Leaves skittered across the alley, stirred by a gentle breeze. I made my way to the first dumpster, my boots crunching on loose gravel. The metal handle was cold against my palm as I flipped open the lid. That's when I heard it. A muffled thump, followed by what sounded like a whimper. I froze, straining my ears. Had I imagined it? The city at night played tricks on you sometimes, the wind whistling through alleyways or stray cats fighting over territory. But no, there it was again, definitely coming from inside the dumpster. "Hey, Mike," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You might want to come check this out." I heard the creak of the truck door and Mike's heavy footsteps approaching. "What's the matter, kid? Trash too scary for you," he joked, but I could hear the hint of concern in his voice. "There's something in here," I said, gesturing to the dumpster. I think it might be alive." Mike's eyebrows furrowed as he came to stand beside me. We both leaned in, listening intently. The sound came again, louder this time, a definite thump, followed by what could only be described as a muffled cry. "Jesus," Mike breathed. "That ain't no animal." My heart was pounding now, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Without thinking, I plunged my hands into the garbage, tossing aside bags and loose debris. Mike joined in, and soon we were both elbow deep in the detritus of other people's lives. That's when my hand brushed against something soft and warm. I jerked back instinctively, then steeled myself and reached in again. This time my fingers closed around what felt unmistakably like a human arm. "Mike," I gasped, "help me pull." Together we heaved, and slowly a figure emerged from the depths of the dumpster. It was a person, bound and gagged, their eyes wide with terror and relief. As we lifted them out onto the ground, I could see it was a young woman, probably in her early 20s. Her wrists and ankles were zip-tied, and a dirty rag was stuffed in her mouth. She was trembling violently, whether from cold or fear I couldn't tell. Mike sprang into action, his years of experience kicking in. He pulled out his pocket knife and carefully cut away the zip ties while I gently removed the gag. "It's okay, you're safe now," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "We're going to call for help." The woman gulped in air, coughing and sobbing. I shrugged off my work jacket and draped it over her shoulders as Mike fumbled for his cell phone. That's when the night erupted in blinding light. A pair of headlights suddenly illuminated the alley, so bright it was like daybreak. The roar of an engine shattered the quiet, and I looked up to see a black SUV barreling towards us. "Get down," Mike yelled, throwing himself over the woman. I hit the ground hard, scraping my palms on the rough asphalt. The SUV screeched to a halt mere feet from where we lay. I could smell burning rubber and hear the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. For a moment, everything was still. Then the driver's door flew open. I lifted my head, squinting against the glare of the headlights. A figure emerged from the vehicle, tall and imposing. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out more details. It was a man dressed all in black, his face obscured by a ski mask. "Well, well," a deep voice rumbled. "Looks like we have some nosy garbage men." I felt my blood run cold. This was the guy, the one who had put that poor woman in the dumpster. And now he was back to finish the job. Mike was the first to find his voice. "Listen, buddy," he said, slowly rising to his feet with his hands raised. "We don't want any trouble. Just let us go and we'll forget this ever happened." The man laughed, a chilling sound that echoed off the brick walls of the alley. "I'm afraid it's not that simple," he said, reaching behind his back. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the glint of metal as he pulled out a gun. I saw Mike's eyes widen in fear. I saw the woman, still huddled on the ground, her face a mask of terror. And then I saw our garbage truck. In that split second, I made a decision. I lunged for the cab, my hand closing around the door handle. I yanked it open and threw myself inside, fumbling for the keys that Mike always left in the ignition. The engine roared to life just as I heard the first gunshot. The sound galvanized me into action. I slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator. The massive vehicle lurched forward, its bulk moving with surprising speed. I aimed straight for the SUV, hearing the satisfying crunch of metal as we collided. The impact threw me forward, my seatbelt digging painfully into my chest. Through the windshield, I saw the masked man stumble, thrown off balance by the collision. It was all the opening Mike needed. He tackled the guy, wrestling him to the ground. The gun skittered across the asphalt, coming to rest near a storm drain. I leaped from the truck, my heart pounding in my ears. Mike had the upper hand, his larger frame pinning the attacker to the ground. But the masked man was fighting back fiercely, landing solid blows to Mike's ribs. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, a broken piece of 2x4 lying next to the dumpster. I hefted it in my hands, feeling the rough wood against my palms. "Mike, move!" I yelled. My partner rolled to the side just as I swung the board. It connected with the masked man's head with a sickening thud. He went limp instantly. For a moment, the only sound was our heavy breathing and the tick of cooling engines. Then in the distance, I heard sirens. "You okay?" I asked Mike, offering him a hand up. He nodded, wincing as he got to his feet. "Yeah, thanks to you, kid. Quick thinking with the truck." We turned our attention to the woman who was still huddled against the dumpster, my jacket clutched tightly around her. Her eyes were wide, darting between us and her unconscious attacker. "It's over," I said softly, approaching her slowly. "The police are on their way. You're safe now." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. As the adrenaline began to fade, I felt my own hands start to shake. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. We had saved a life tonight. We'd faced down a monster and come out the other side. But as I looked at the unconscious man on the ground, at the dented SUV and our damaged garbage truck, I knew that this night was far from over. The sirens grew louder, red and blue lights beginning to flash at the end of the alley. As the first police car pulled up, I took a deep breath. It was going to be a long night of questions and statements, but we were alive. We were safe, and we had made a difference. Who would have thought that two ordinary garbage men would end up being heroes? But that's the thing about this job. You never know what you're going to find when you open up a dumpster. Sometimes it's just trash, and sometimes it's a chance to change someone's life forever. As the alley filled with police officers and paramedics, I caught Mike's eye. He gave me a tired smile and a thumbs up. Yeah, we'd be telling this story for years to come. The night that started with a routine pickup and ended with us taking out a different kind of trash. Just another night on the job for your friendly neighborhood garbage men. Story 5. The engine of my Kawasaki roared beneath me as I weaved through the city's neon-lit streets. The adrenaline coursing through my veins wasn't from the ride. It was from the fear. They were still behind me, gaining ground with every turn. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but one thing was clear. This delivery run had turned into a fight for survival. My name's Alex Chen, and I'm a motorcycle courier in the bustling metropolis of New Harbor. Usually my nights are filled with the rush of weaving through traffic, the satisfaction of beating the clock, and the simple pleasure of feeling the wind on my face. But tonight was different. It started like any other run. I got the call at 11:30 p.m., a last-minute delivery, some legal documents that absolutely had to be at their destination by midnight. Good money for a quick job, so I didn't hesitate. I swung by the law office downtown, picked up the sealed envelope, and hit the streets. The city was quieter than usual, the late hour having thinned out the usual crowds. My headlight cut through the misty air as I navigated the familiar grid of streets, the skyscrapers looming above me like silent sentinels. I was about halfway to my destination when I first noticed the black SUV. It caught my eye because it was keeping pace with me, which isn't easy in city traffic. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then I took a right turn onto 7th Avenue, and so did the SUV. A few blocks later, I changed lanes and took a quick left onto Market Street. The SUV followed, smoothly maneuvering through traffic to stay right behind me. That's when the first tendrils of unease started to creep in. I accelerated, weaving between cars with practiced ease. The SUV kept up, its engine growling as it matched my speed. My heart started to race. This couldn't be a coincidence. I made a split-second decision and took a sharp right down a narrow side street, hoping to lose them. No such luck. The SUV swung wide, nearly clipping a parked car as it made the turn. In my mirrors, I could see its headlights bearing down on me, growing larger by the second. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, my knuckles white as I gripped the handlebars tighter. I gunned the engine, the Kawasaki responding with a burst of speed. The wind whipped at my jacket as I leaned into the turns, taking corners faster than I ever had before. But no matter how fast I went, how many turns I took, the SUV was always there, its tinted windows revealing nothing about who was inside or what they wanted. My mind raced faster than my bike. Who were these people? What did they want? Was it the package I was carrying? But it was just some legal documents, wasn't it? I cut across 3 lanes of traffic and took a hard left, earning a chorus of honks from angry drivers. The SUV followed, its bulk shouldering smaller cars out of the way. That's when I realized they weren't just following me. They were trying to run me off the road. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't some misunderstanding or case of mistaken identity. These people, whoever they were, meant business. I checked my fuel gauge and felt my stomach drop. The needle was hovering dangerously close to empty. In my haste to make the delivery, I had forgotten to fuel up. Now that oversight might cost me everything. I had to think fast. I knew every street and alley in this city, but with my fuel running low, I couldn't keep this chase up for much longer. I needed a plan. As if the universe was listening to my thoughts, I spotted a familiar neon sign up ahead. Joey's All-Night Garage. Joey was an old friend, someone who'd patched up my bike more times than I could count. If anyone could help me out of this mess, it was him. I made a sharp turn, nearly laying the bike down as I took the corner at breakneck speed. The SUV overshot the turn, buying me a precious few seconds. I gunned it towards Joey's, praying he was working late tonight. The garage's roll-up door was open, warm light spilling out onto the dark street. I could see Joey inside, bent over the engine of a classic Mustang. "Joey!" I shouted as I roared into the garage. "Close the door, now!" To his credit, Joey didn't hesitate. He jumped up and hit the button to lower the door, his eyes wide as he took in my panicked state. "Alex, what the hell's going on?" he asked as the door rumbled shut behind me. I killed the engine and practically fell off the bike, my legs shaky from the adrenaline. "Someone's after me," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "Black SUV. They've been chasing me for the last 20 minutes. Joey's face hardened. He might just be a mechanic, but he'd seen his fair share of trouble in his day. "Back room," he said, jerking his thumb towards the rear of the garage. "Go." Now, I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed the package from my courier bag and darted towards the back, hearing the roar of an engine outside. Joey calmly walked over to a workbench and picked up a hefty wrench just as a pounding came at the garage door. "We're closed!" Joey shouted, his voice gruff and unyielding. "Open up!" a muffled voice demanded from outside. "Police business." I froze in the doorway to the back room. "Police? But why wouldn't they have used sirens or flashed badges?" Joey caught my eye and gave a subtle shake of his head. He didn't buy it either. "Slide your badge under the door," Joey called back. "I'll open up when I see some ID." There was a moment of tense silence, then the sound of a car door slamming. The engine revved, tires squealed, and then silence. Joey waited a full minute before he slowly walked to the door and peeked out. "They're gone," he said, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "For now, at least." I slumped against the wall, my heart still pounding. "Joey, I don't know what's going on. I was just making a delivery and then—" "Let me see that package," Joey said, holding out his hand. I hesitated for a moment, then handed it over. It was just legal documents, right? What harm could there be? Joey turned the envelope over in his hands, his brow furrowed. Then he held it up to the light and his eyes widened. "Alex," he said slowly, "I don't think these are legal documents." "What?" I pushed off the wall and moved closer. "What do you mean?" Joey pointed to a faint outline visible through the envelope. "See that? That's not paper, that's—" "A hard drive," I finished, my mouth going dry. "But why would someone send a hard drive in a legal envelope?" "I don't know," Joey said, handing the package back to me. "But whatever's on it, someone's willing to go to great lengths to get their hands on it." I stared at the envelope, my mind reeling. What had I gotten myself into? What was on this hard drive that was worth chasing me through the city? "What do I do now?" I asked, looking up at Joey. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You've got two choices, kid. You can either finish your delivery and hope those goons don't catch up to you again, or you can open that envelope and find out what's so important that people are willing to kill for it." I looked down at the envelope in my hands. The responsible courier in me said to just make the delivery and be done with it. But the part of me that had just been chased through the city, the part that was still shaking with fear and adrenaline, wanted answers. "If I open it," I said slowly, "I could be destroying evidence. Or worse, making myself an accomplice to whatever this is." Joey nodded. "True, but if you deliver it without knowing what it is, you could be helping some very bad people do some very bad things." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. When I opened them, I had made my decision. "Got a computer I can use?" Joey grinned and led me to a dusty old desktop in the corner of his office. As the ancient machine whirred to life, I carefully opened the envelope and extracted the hard drive. "Whatever's on here," I said as I connected the drive, "I have a feeling it's going to change everything." The screen flickered and files began to populate the display. As I started to read, my eyes grew wide. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Joey, you need to see this." As Joey leaned in to look, I knew that my life as a simple motorcycle courier was over. Whatever was on this hard drive had set me on a path I couldn't turn back from. The chase through the city streets was just the beginning. The real journey and the real danger was just starting. Story 6. The wind howled like a banshee, rain lashing against our windshield in angry sheets. I could barely see 10 feet ahead, but my husband Mark insisted we press on. "We can't stop now," he said, knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We're already running late." That's when we saw him. A lone figure on the roadside, arm outstretched, thumb raised in desperate hope. Little did we know picking up this bedraggled stranger would change everything. I squinted through the rain-streaked passenger window as Mark slowed the car. The hitchhiker was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to his thin frame. He couldn't have been much older than 20, with a mop of dark hair plastered to his forehead. "We can't just leave him out here," I said, already reaching for the door handle. Mark hesitated. "Sarah, we don't know anything about this guy." But I was already rolling down my window. "Hey there, need a ride?" The young man's face lit up with relief. "Oh, thank you, yes, please." Before Mark could protest further, I was out of the car, ushering our new passenger into the back seat. As I climbed back in, I caught a whiff of wet dog and something else, a metallic tang that made my nose wrinkle. "I'm Sarah," I said, twisting in my seat to face him. "This is my husband, Mark. Where are you headed?" The hitchhiker's eyes darted between us, wide and a little wild. Just up the road a ways. There's a town called Millbrook, you know it?" Mark nodded, easing the car back onto the slick highway. "Yeah, we're passing through there on our way to my sister's wedding. It's about 30 miles up, right?" Right, the young man mumbled. He was shivering, his teeth chattering audibly. "What's your name?" I asked, reaching for a blanket we kept in the back for emergencies. He hesitated, as if trying to remember. "Jake," he finally said. "I'm Jake." I handed him the blanket, which he accepted gratefully. "So, Jake, what brings you out to the middle of nowhere in this weather?" Jake wrapped the blanket tightly around himself, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. "I was visiting a friend, lost track of time, missed my bus." Something about his tone made me uneasy, but I chalked it up to his obvious discomfort. "Well, you're lucky we came along when we did. The storm is really picking up." As if on cue, a flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Jake flinched visibly, pulling the blanket tighter. "You okay back there?" Mark asked, eyeing Jake in the rearview mirror. Jake nodded jerkily. "Yeah, just not a fan of storms." We drove in silence for a while, the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof filling the car. I tried to make small talk, but Jake's responses were terse, distracted. His eyes kept darting to the windows as if searching for something in the darkness beyond. After about 15 minutes, Jake suddenly sat up straight, his face pale. "Stop the car," he said urgently. Mark frowned. "What? We're in the middle of—" "Please," Jake insisted, his voice rising. "You have to stop. Now." Startled by his vehemence, Mark pulled over onto the shoulder. Jake was out of the car before we'd fully stopped, stumbling a few steps before doubling over, hands on his knees. I got out, concern overriding my unease. "Jake, are you all right?" He straightened up, rain plastering his hair to his skull. "You can't go to Millbrook," he said, his eyes wild. "It's not safe." Mark had joined us, rain soaking through his jacket. "What are you talking about?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth. "There's something wrong there, something bad. I saw it. I shouldn't have left, but I was scared, and now—" I exchanged a worried glance with Mark. Was this guy on drugs, having some kind of breakdown? "Jake," I said gently, "why don't you get back in the car? We can talk about this somewhere dry." But he shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. They're all wrong. Like puppets. And the thing controlling them, it's hungry." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the rain. "Who's they, Jake? What thing?" He looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears. "Everyone, the whole town, it got them all, and now it wants more." Mark put a protective arm around me. "Okay, buddy, I think you need some help. Why don't we take you to a hospital?" Jake laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "A hospital won't help. Nothing can help Millbrook now. But you can still get away. Just turn around. Go back the way you came." I felt torn. Part of me wanted to dismiss Jake's ramblings as the product of a disturbed mind, but there was something in his eyes, a raw, primal fear. That gave me pause. "Mark," I said quietly, "maybe we should—" But Jake cut me off. "No time," he said, backing away from us. "They're coming, I can feel it. You have to go. Now, we're—" Before we could stop him, he turned and ran into the woods bordering the highway, quickly swallowed by the darkness and rain. Mark and I stood there for a moment, stunned. "Should we go after him?" I asked. Mark shook his head. "He's clearly not in his right mind. We should call the police, let them handle it." We got back in the car, both of us soaked and shaken. As Mark reached for his phone, I noticed headlights approaching in the distance. "Maybe that's a police car," I said hopefully. But as the vehicle drew closer, I realized it wasn't a patrol car at all. It was an old pickup truck, moving erratically, swerving from one side of the road to the other. "Mark," I said, a note of panic creeping into my voice. "We should go." He looked up from his phone, eyes widening as he saw the approaching truck. Without a word, he started the engine and pulled back onto the road. The truck was gaining on us fast. In the rearview mirror, I could see it was packed with people, their faces pale smudges in the darkness. "What the hell?" Mark muttered, accelerating. The truck rammed us from behind, the impact jolting us forward. I screamed, fumbling for my seatbelt. "Hold on!" Mark yelled, swerving to avoid another hit. We sped through the night, the truck in hot pursuit. Every time it got close, I caught glimpses of the passengers, their blank, empty eyes, their mouths opened in silent screams. Jake's words echoed in my head. "They're all wrong, like puppets." Another impact, harder this time, our car fishtailed, tires squealing on the wet asphalt. Mark fought for control, but it was too late. We spun off the road, plunging down a steep embankment. The world turned upside down, glass shattering, metal crunching. When we finally came to a stop, I was hanging upside down, held in place by my seatbelt. Beside me, Mark was unconscious, a trickle of blood running down his forehead. Dazed, I fumbled with my seatbelt, crashing to the roof of the overturned car. I could hear footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. "Mark," I whispered urgently, shaking him. "Mark, wake up." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Sarah, what?" "We have to get out of here," I said, already crawling towards the shattered rear window. As we stumbled away from the wreck, I saw them, a group of people walking down the embankment towards us. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes on invisible strings. "Run!" I gasped, pulling Mark along. We plunged into the woods, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. Behind us, I could hear them coming, their footsteps in perfect, terrible unison. We ran until our lungs burned, until the sound of pursuit faded into the distance. Finally, we collapsed against a large tree, gasping for breath. "What? What were those things?" Mark panted. I shook my head, unable to speak. In the distance, I could see lights, a gas station or maybe a small store. "We need to get help," I said, pulling Mark to his feet. As we approached the lights, I felt a glimmer of hope, but it died as soon as we got close enough to see clearly. The gas station was abandoned, its windows dark and empty. And there, spray-painted across the boarded-up door in dripping red letters, was a message that made my blood run cold. "Turn back. Millbrook is lost." Mark and I looked at each other, the full weight of Jake's warning finally sinking in. Whatever was happening in Millbrook, it was real, and it was spreading. In that moment, I knew our lives would never be the same. We were no longer just a couple on their way to a wedding. We were survivors, witnesses to something dark and inexplicable. As we turned away from the ominous message, seeking refuge in the vast, uncaring forest, I couldn't help but think of Jake. Had he escaped? Or had the things from Millbrook caught up with him? One thing was certain. We couldn't go back. The road behind us led only to horror. Our only choice was to push forward into the unknown and pray that somewhere ahead we'd find safety, answers, and a way to stop whatever malevolent force had taken root in Millbrook. The storm raged on, but now it felt almost comforting, a natural, understandable threat in a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly strange. As Mark and I ventured deeper into the woods hand in hand, I realized that our real journey was just beginning. And somewhere out there, Millbrook waited, a cancer spreading through the night, hungry for new victims. Story 7. The old bridge groaned beneath us, a sound that sent chills down my spine even before I felt the first tremor. I'd driven this route 100 times, but never in weather like this. As the rain lashed against the windshield and the wind howled around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that this might be the last trip I'd ever make. My name's Carl, and I've been driving buses for Hillside Transit for over 2 decades. I've seen my fair share of close calls and dicey situations, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night on Oak Ridge Bridge. It was a Friday evening in late October. The weather forecast had been calling for heavy rain all week, but nobody expected the deluge that actually hit us. I remember checking my watch as I pulled out of the depot, 7:15 p.m. My route was the last one of the night, ferrying the stragglers and night shift workers across the river to the east side of town. The bus was about half full as we left downtown. There was old Mrs. Peabody in her usual spot near the front, clutching her oversized purse like always. A group of college kids huddled in the back, laughing and joking despite the gloomy weather. A few factory workers dozed in their seats, heading home after a long day. As we wound our way through the city streets, the rain intensified. It drummed on the roof of the bus, creating a constant background roar that made it hard to hear anything else. The windshield wipers were working overtime, but they could barely keep up with the sheets of water cascading down the glass. I leaned forward in my seat, squinting to see through the blur. The streetlights created hazy halos in the rain, and more than once I had to slow down to make sure I didn't miss a turn. "Sure is coming down out there," a voice piped up from behind me. It was Tommy, one of the regulars on this route. He worked the night shift at the packaging plant across the river. "You can say that again," I replied, forcing a chuckle. "Don't think I've ever seen it this bad." As we approached the river, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. The Oak Ridge Bridge was old, built in the 1950s and not updated much since then. It was sturdy enough under normal conditions, but this weather was far from normal. We turned onto the approach to the bridge, and I could feel the wind buffeting the bus. The rain was coming in sideways now, reducing visibility to almost nothing. I slowed down to a crawl, both hands gripping the wheel tightly. That's when I saw it. A crack in the road right at the start of the bridge. It wasn't large, maybe the width of my thumb, but it shouldn't have been there at all. As the front wheels of the bus rolled over it, I felt a slight bump. "Everything okay up there?" Mrs. Peabody called out, her voice quavering slightly. "Just fine, ma'am," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Road's a little rough is all." But it wasn't fine. As we inched our way onto the bridge proper, I could feel something was off. The whole structure seemed to be vibrating, a low rumble that I could feel through the soles of my feet. We were about a quarter of the way across when I heard the first creak. It was a loud metallic groan that cut through the sound of the rain and wind. The bus shuddered, and I heard gasps from the passengers. "What was that?" Someone called out. I didn't answer. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead, searching for any sign of further damage. That's when I saw it. A section of guardrail about halfway across the bridge had come loose. It was swaying in the wind, threatening to tear away completely. My hands were sweating now despite the chill in the air. I knew we had to get off this bridge and fast, but turning around wasn't an option. The bus was too long and the bridge too narrow. Another creak, louder this time. The vibration intensified, and I could hear the sound of rushing water over the storm. The river below us, usually calm, had turned into a raging torrent. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. "I need everyone to move towards the front of the bus, please. Nice and slow." There were murmurs of confusion and fear, but people started to comply. I could see their worried faces in the rearview mirror as they shuffled forward. We were halfway across now. The bridge was swaying noticeably, the movement making it hard to keep the bus in a straight line. I had slowed to a crawl, barely moving faster than a walking pace. That's when I heard it, a loud crack like a gunshot. The bus lurched violently to one side. In the mirror, I saw a section of the road behind us collapse, disappearing into the churning water below. Screams filled the air. The college kids in the back were crying now, clinging to each other. Mrs. Peabody had her eyes squeezed shut, her lips moving in silent prayer. "Hold on, everyone," I shouted, my foot hovering between the brake and the accelerator. I knew if I stopped, the weight of the bus might be too much for the weakened bridge. But if I went too fast, we risked skidding on the wet road. Another crack. Another section of the bridge fell away, this time closer to us. The back end of the bus tilted alarmingly, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought we were going over. But somehow the tires found purchase. We lurched forward, the engine straining as it pulled us up the now steep incline. The far side of the bridge seemed miles away. The wind was howling now, drowning out the sounds of the panicked passengers. Rain lashed against the windows with such force I thought the glass might shatter. I could see the end of the bridge, just a few more yards, but would we make it? The bus was shuddering constantly now, the whole bridge feeling like it might tear apart at any second. I had both feet on the accelerator, silently urging the old vehicle to give me everything it had. 20 feet, 15, 10. With a final almighty groan, the bridge began to give way behind us. I felt the back wheels lose contact with the road for a split second. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. I could see every raindrop on the windshield, hear every terrified breath from the passengers. And then with a bone-jarring thud, we were on solid ground. The back wheels touched down on the far side of the bridge just as the last section collapsed into the river. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I drove another 100 yards before finally bringing the bus to a halt on the side of the road. For a moment, there was complete silence. Even the storm seemed to have quieted. Then slowly it started. A cheer. Quiet at first, then building. Soon the whole bus was filled with the sound of relieved laughter, grateful sobs, and fervent thank yous. I sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, my knuckles white. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Slowly, I became aware of a hand on my shoulder. It was Tommy. "You did it, Carl," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You saved us." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Someone must have called 911. As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. We had been seconds away from disaster. If I had made one wrong move, if the bus had been a little heavier, if the bridge had given way just a moment sooner. But it hadn't. We were safe. All of us. I finally turned to face the passengers. There were tears, hugs, phones clutched in shaking hands as people called loved ones. Mrs. Peabody caught my eye and gave me a watery smile. "I always said you were the best driver on this route, Carl," she said. "Now I know why." As the first police cars pulled up, their lights painting the rainy night in flashes of red and blue, I took a deep breath. It was over. We had made it. I've driven a lot of routes in my years with Hillside Transit, seen a lot of things. But I'll never forget that night on Oak Ridge Bridge. The night I learned that sometimes being a bus driver means more than just getting from point A to point B. Sometimes it means being the thin line between life and death. And sometimes, against all odds, it means bringing everyone home safe. Story 8. The echo of footsteps bounced off concrete walls, a ghostly chorus growing louder with each passing second. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs as if trying to break free. In the dim fluorescent light of the parking garage, my shadow stretched before me, a dark companion in my race against an unseen pursuer. I'd parked on the 4th floor, just 3 more levels to go. But would I make it in time? My name is Sarah Reeves, and what should have been a routine trip to the mall turned into the most terrifying night of my life. It had been a long day at the office, and I desperately needed to pick up a gift for my sister's birthday tomorrow. The Oakbrook Mall was open late on Fridays, so I figured I'd zip in, make a quick purchase, and be home in time for a late dinner and some much-needed sleep. I pulled into the multi-story parking garage around 9:30 p.m. It was nearly empty, just a scattering of cars here and there. I found a spot on the 4th floor near the elevator. Perfect for a quick getaway, I thought to myself with a chuckle. Little did I know how prophetic that casual thought would become. The mall was quieter than I expected, most shops already closed or closing. I hurried to the bookstore, knowing my sister's taste in novels. 15 minutes later, gift in hand, I was headed back to my car. As I pushed open the heavy door to the parking garage, the silence hit me like a wall. Gone was the faint muzak and chatter of the mall. In its place was a stillness so complete it made my ears ring. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly pale glow. I started walking towards the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. That's when I first heard it, another set of footsteps out of sync with mine. I paused, and the sound stopped a split second later. My heart rate picked up a notch. It was probably nothing, I told myself, just an echo playing tricks on me. I resumed walking a bit faster this time. The footsteps returned, louder and more distinct. They weren't in sync with mine anymore. They were gaining on me. I glanced over my shoulder. The garage stretched out behind me, a concrete maze of support pillars and parked cars. In the shadows between the light fixtures, anything or anyone could be hiding. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the vast space. No response. I turned back and quickened my pace, no longer trying to convince myself it was just an echo. Someone was following me. The elevator was just ahead. I fumbled in my purse for my keys, the jingle of metal sounding impossibly loud in the tense silence. As I neared the elevator, I risked another glance back. A shadow moved between two cars about 50 feet behind me. My blood ran cold. This was really happening. I jabbed the elevator button repeatedly as if that would make it arrive faster. The display above the doors showed it was on the ground floor. It would take forever to reach me. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear the measured pace, unhurried but deliberate. Whoever it was, they knew they had me cornered. In a split-second decision, I abandoned the elevator and made a break for the stairs. My heels clacked loudly on the concrete as I ran, the sound echoing off the walls and ceiling. The footsteps behind me quickened in response. I burst through the stairwell door, the hollow metal clang reverberating in the enclosed space. I started down the stairs, gripping the railing to keep my balance as I took them two at a time, one floor down. The footsteps entered the stairwell above me, no longer trying to be stealthy. They were coming fast. 2 floors down. My lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. I could hear my pursuer gaining on me, their footfalls heavy and determined. As I rounded the landing to the second floor, I risked a glance up. A figure was silhouetted at the top of the stairs, dark and menacing. In the poor light, I couldn't make out any features, but I saw something glint in their hand. A knife? A gun? I choked back a scream and redoubled my efforts, practically throwing myself down the last flight of stairs. I slammed into the ground floor exit, bursting out into the main garage area. My car was 3 levels up. There was no way I could make it back up there without getting caught. I had to get out of the garage. I sprinted towards the exit, my legs protesting with every step. Behind me, I heard the stairwell door bang open. They were right behind me. The exit was just ahead, the night sky visible beyond the opening. Just a few more yards. Headlights suddenly flooded the garage, momentarily blinding me. A car was pulling in, moving slowly as the driver searched for a spot. I waved my arms frantically, screaming, "Help! Please help me!" The car stopped, and I saw the startled face of the driver, a middle-aged man, his eyes wide with surprise and confusion. I ran to the driver's side, yanking on the door handle. "Please," I gasped. "Let me in! Someone's chasing me!" The man hesitated for a split second, then hit the unlock button. I dove into the back seat, slamming the door behind me. "Drive!" I yelled. "Please, just drive!" The man stomped on the accelerator, tires squealing as we shot towards the exit. In the rearview mirror, I saw a figure emerge from the shadows, standing in the middle of the garage and watching us leave. As we pulled out onto the street, the adrenaline that had been keeping me going suddenly drained away. I started shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face. "Are you okay?" the driver asked, his voice tight with concern. "Should I take you to the police station?" I nodded, unable to speak through my sobs. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the police station, a scratchy blanket around my shoulders and a cup of lukewarm coffee in my trembling hands. I'd given my statement to a sympathetic officer, describing the chase and the shadowy figure as best I could. "We'll send a unit to check out the garage," the officer assured me. "Is there someone who can come pick you up? You shouldn't be alone tonight." I nodded, thinking of my roommate, Rachel. She'd be worried sick, but I knew she'd come get me right away. As I waited for Rachel to arrive, I couldn't shake the image of that figure standing in the garage, watching as I escaped. Who were they? What did they want? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. The police officer approached me again, a serious look on his face. "Ms. Reeves, we've just heard back from the unit we sent to the mall," he said. "They've reviewed the security footage from the garage." I sat up straighter, my heart pounding. Did they see who was chasing me? The officer's brow furrowed. "That's just it, Ms. Reeves. The footage shows you entering the garage and running to your car, but there's no one else there. The cameras don't show anyone following you." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible," I stammered. "I heard them. I saw them." "I believe that you believe you saw someone," the officer said gently. "But the cameras don't lie. You were alone in that garage." I shook my head, my mind reeling. How could that be? I'd heard the footsteps, seen the shadow. It had all felt so real. As Rachel arrived to take me home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. Had it all been in my imagination? Was my mind playing tricks on me? But as we drove away from the police station, a chill ran down my spine. In the side mirror, for just a split second, I thought I saw a shadowy figure standing on the sidewalk watching our car disappear into the night. Real or imagined, the terror I'd felt in that parking garage had changed me. I knew I'd never feel completely safe in the dark again. Every shadow would hide a potential threat, every echo a phantom pursuer. As we pulled up to our apartment, Rachel gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're safe now," she said softly. I nodded, managing a weak smile. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Because if what I'd experienced wasn't real, if my mind could conjure such vivid terror out of nothing, then was I ever truly safe? Even from myself? I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, the night air cool on my skin. Whatever had happened in that garage, whatever awaited me in the future, I knew one thing for certain. I would never park on the top floor again. Story 9. The headlights appeared out of nowhere, flooding my rearview mirror with blinding light. 1 second I was cruising down the empty highway, lost in thought, and the next I was squinting against the glare, my heart racing. Little did I know those lights would haunt me for the next 2 hours, turning a routine drive into a nightmare I'll never forget. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, 11:23 p.m. The soft glow of the numbers was a stark contrast to the pitch-black night outside. I'd been driving for almost 3 hours, making my way back home after visiting my sister in the city. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkness. At first, I didn't think much of the car behind me. Night driving on lonely roads often made me jumpy, and I chalked up my unease to an overactive imagination. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear this wasn't just paranoia. The car stayed close, too close. Every time I sped up, they matched my pace. When I slowed down, hoping they'd pass, they slowed too, riding my bumper so close I couldn't even see their license plate. "Come on," I muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Just go around already." But they didn't. Instead, the driver flashed their high beams, the sudden burst of light making me flinch. I checked my speed. I was already going 5 over the limit. What did this person want? I tried to get a better look in my mirror, but all I could see was the silhouette of a large vehicle, an SUV or a truck, and those relentless headlights. The driver was nothing more than a dark shape behind the wheel. My palms were sweating now, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I'd heard stories about highway robberies, about criminals who forced drivers off the road. Was that what this was? I reached for my phone, balancing it on the steering wheel as I tried to dial 911. But as soon as I looked down, the car behind me honked, a long, aggressive blast that made me jump. My phone clattered to the floor, sliding under the passenger seat. "Shit," I hissed, fighting the urge to reach for it. I couldn't take my eyes off the road, not with this maniac on my tail. The next exit was still 10 miles away, according to the last road sign I'd seen. 10 miles had never felt so far. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my old sedan to its limits. The engine whined in protest as the speedometer crept past 80, then 90. But it didn't matter. The headlights stayed with me, a constant presence in my mirrors. Whoever was driving that car, their vehicle clearly had more power than mine. I was running out of options. There were no other cars on the road, no houses or businesses along this stretch of highway. Just me, my stalker, and miles of empty road. Suddenly, the car behind me swerved into the left lane. For a split second, I felt a wave of relief. They were finally going to pass. But instead of speeding by, they pulled up alongside me, pacing my car. I kept my eyes straight ahead, too terrified to look over. In my peripheral vision, I could see the dark mass of the vehicle, hear the roar of its engine competing with my own. Then, slowly, the passenger window started to roll down. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. They were going to shoot me or throw something at my car or... A voice cut through the noise of the engines and the rush of wind. "Pull over!" It was a woman's voice, stern and authoritative. Despite my fear, curiosity got the better of me. I chanced a quick glance to my left. The woman behind the wheel was middle-aged, her face set in a grim expression. But what caught my eye was the uniform she was wearing. A police uniform. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by confusion. Why hadn't she used her siren or flashing lights? Why the aggressive tailgating? "Pull over now!" she shouted again. I nodded, easing my foot off the accelerator and guiding my car onto the shoulder. The police vehicle. I could see now it was an unmarked SUV pulled in behind me. As I put the car in park, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I watched in my side mirror as the officer got out of her vehicle and approached my car. "Keep your hands where I can see them," she called out as she neared my window. I raised my hands, placing them on the steering wheel. "Officer," I said as she reached my door, my voice trembling. "I'm sorry if I was speeding. I didn't realize—" "License and registration." She cut me off, her tone brusque. As I reached for my documents, trying to keep my movements slow and deliberate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The lack of lights or siren, the aggressive driving, the unmarked car, none of it fit with what I knew about proper police procedure. I handed over my license and registration with shaking hands. The officer studied them for a moment, then looked back at me, her eyes narrowing. "Step out of the vehicle," she ordered. My stomach dropped. "Officer, may I ask why? I don't understand what—" I said. "Step out of the vehicle. Now." The hint of menace in her voice made me pause. I'd seen enough true crime shows to know that real officers were supposed to tell you why they were asking you to exit your car. This woman hadn't given me any reason. In that moment, a chilling thought struck me. What if she wasn't really a police officer? I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Officer, I'm sorry, but I don't feel comfortable stepping out. Could you please tell me why you pulled me over?" Her expression darkened. "Listen, I'm not going to ask again. Get out of the car or I'll have to use force." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every instinct was screaming at me that this was wrong, that I was in danger. But what could I do? If she was a real officer, refusing to comply could land me in serious trouble. As I hesitated, torn between obedience and self-preservation, a miracle happened. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching. Another car was coming down the highway. The woman saw it too. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me, indecision clear on her face. "Last chance," she growled. "Get out now." In that split second, I made my decision. I gunned the engine, my tires spinning on the gravel shoulder before finding purchase. The car leapt forward, leaving the woman standing there, a look of fury on her face. In my rearview mirror, I saw her sprint back to her vehicle. Within seconds, she was after me again, no pretense of being a police officer now. She was gaining on me fast, her more powerful vehicle easily outpacing my sedan. The other car was getting closer. It was my only hope. I flashed my lights frantically, trying to get their attention. "Please," I thought desperately, "please help me." Just as the SUV was about to ram me from behind, the oncoming car crested a hill. It was a semi-truck, its headlights blazing like twin suns. I swerved into the oncoming lane, praying the truck driver would understand, would see the SUV bearing down on me. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd miscalculated, that I was about to collide head-on with the massive truck. But the driver must have seen what was happening. The truck's horn blared, a deafening blast that seemed to shake the very air. It swerved slightly, giving me just enough room to squeeze by. The SUV, unable to stop in time, had to veer sharply to avoid hitting the truck. I watched in my mirror as it spun out, tires screeching, before coming to a stop on the shoulder. I didn't slow down. I drove as fast as my car would go. My hands clenched so tight on the steering wheel that my knuckles were white. It wasn't until I saw the lights of a town in the distance that I finally let myself breathe. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, my whole body shaking. As I stumbled out of the car, legs weak with leftover adrenaline, I saw a police cruiser parked near the convenience store. A real police cruiser, with proper markings and lights. The officer inside looked at me with concern as I approached, tears streaming down my face. "Miss, are you all right?" I shook my head, the events of the past 2 hours pouring out of me in a rush. The officer listened intently, his face growing more serious with each detail. As I finished my story, he put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said. "We've had reports of someone impersonating an officer in this area. You're lucky you trusted your instincts." Lucky. The word echoed in my head as I sat in the real police car, giving my official statement. Was it luck or something more? I thought about all the little decisions that had led to my escape, the approaching truck, my split-second choice to run. In the end, I realized it came down to trusting myself. In a world where danger can wear a friendly face or even a police uniform, sometimes our instincts are all we have to guide us. As I watched the sun rise from the police station window, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I made a promise to myself. I would never ignore that little voice again, the one that whispers something's not right. Because sometimes that voice is the only thing standing between us and the monsters that lurk in the darkness, waiting for us to let our guard down. Story 10. I should have known something was off when I was the only passenger on the last bus of the night. But exhaustion has a way of dulling your senses, of making you ignore that little voice in your head screaming that something isn't right. By the time I realized the danger I was in, it was already too late. My name is Sarah, and I work the late shift at St. Mary's Hospital. I'm a nurse in the ER, which means I've seen my fair share of tragedy and trauma, but nothing in my medical training could have prepared me for what happened on that bus ride home. It was a Thursday night, or rather Friday morning. My shift had run long, as it often did, and I'd missed my usual bus. The clock on my phone read 2:37 a.m. as I hurried to the bus stop, praying I hadn't missed the last one. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that settles over a city in those dark hours between last call and first light. My footsteps echoed off the buildings as I half walked, half jogged down the sidewalk. I rounded the corner just in time to see the bus pulling up to the stop. Relief washed over me as I waved frantically, picking up my pace. The driver must have seen me because he waited, the door hissing open as I approached. "Thanks," I panted, climbing aboard. "I thought I'd missed you." The driver didn't respond. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, with gray hair peeking out from under his uniform cap. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, and something about his gaze made me pause. There was an intensity there, a focus that seemed out of place for a late-night bus driver. I shook off the feeling and made my way down the aisle. The bus was empty, the overhead lights casting a harsh fluorescent glow over the vacant seats. I chose a spot about halfway back, settling in for the 20-minute ride home. As we pulled away from the curb, I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. The events of my shift played through my mind. A car accident victim, a drug overdose, a child with a dangerously high fever. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the images and find a moment of peace. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, we were passing unfamiliar streets. I blinked, disoriented, and looked at my phone. 3:15 a.m. We should have reached my stop 15 minutes ago. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet bus. "I think we've passed my stop." The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror again, but he didn't respond. A tendril of unease began to curl in my stomach. I stood up, gripping the back of the seat in front of me for balance as the bus swayed. "Sir, can you hear me? I need to get off." Still no response. We were definitely heading out of the city now. The buildings were getting sparse, replaced by dark stretches of trees and empty lots. My heart began to race. This wasn't right. None of this was right. I made my way to the front of the bus, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. "Please," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "You need to stop the bus. This isn't my route." For the first time, the driver spoke. His voice was low and gravelly, with an accent I couldn't quite place. "Sit down, miss. We'll be there soon." A chill ran down my spine. "Beware, this isn't the way to my neighborhood. You need to let me off right now." He turned to look at me then, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. There was no warmth there, no reassurance, just a cold, calculated look that made me feel like a mouse cornered by a cat. I said, "Sit down." I stumbled backward, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, did they? I'd treated victims of kidnapping and assault in the ER, heard their horrifying stories, but I never thought I'd find myself in one. My hand found the emergency exit lever on the door. Without thinking, I pulled it hard. Nothing happened. I yanked on it again, panic rising in my throat. The lever moved, but the door remained firmly shut. "It won't open," the driver said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I've made sure of that." My breath was coming in short gasps now. I looked around frantically, searching for something, anything I could use as a weapon or a tool to escape. The driver chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You might as well relax, Sarah. We've got a long ride ahead of us." The use of my name hit me like a physical blow. How did he know who I was? Had he been watching me, planning this? I backed away from him, moving down the aisle. My mind was whirling, trying to come up with a plan. I needed to get help, to alert someone of what was happening. My phone. I reached for my pocket, only to find it empty. With a sinking feeling, I remembered placing it on the seat next to me when I'd sat down. It was still there, tantalizingly out of reach. The bus took a sharp turn, throwing me off balance. I grabbed onto a seat to steady myself, and that's when I saw it. A small red button near the back of the bus labeled Emergency Call. Hope surged through me. If I could just reach that button, maybe I could alert the transit authority or the police. I started moving towards it, trying to be casual. The driver's eyes were on the road now, but I could feel his attention on me like a weight pressing down. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I needed to distract him, to keep him talking while I inched closer to that button. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "Somewhere you can help people who really need it." His words sent a chill through me. What did he mean by that? My mind conjured up horrible images. Underground hospitals, organ trafficking, things I'd only heard about in whispered rumors and sensationalized news stories. I was almost there. Just a few more steps. My fingers brushed against the smooth plastic of the seat backs as I moved. "You're making a mistake," I said, my voice stronger now. Anger was starting to cut through the fear. "People will be looking for me. The hospital will notice when I don't show up for my next shift." The driver laughed again, a harsh bark of sound. "By then, it'll be too late. You'll be long gone, just another missing person in a big city. They'll look for a while, but eventually they'll give up. They always do." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. The idea of disappearing, of my life being erased, was terrifying. I thought of my family, my friends, my patients. Would they wonder what happened to me? Would they ever know the truth? I was at the back of the bus now. The emergency button was right there, just above my head. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. In one swift motion, I reached up and slammed my palm against the button. A loud alarm immediately filled the bus, piercing and insistent. The driver swore, the bus swerving as he was startled by the noise. "What have you done?" he yelled, his calm demeanor finally cracking. I didn't wait for him to recover. I ran to where my phone was, snatching it up. My fingers shook as I tried to unlock it, to call for help. The bus lurched to a stop, throwing me forward. I hit the floor hard, my phone skittering away under a seat. Before I could get up, I felt a hand grab my ankle. The driver was there, his face contorted with rage. "You shouldn't have done that," he growled, pulling me towards him. Terror gave me strength. I kicked out, my foot connecting with his face. He let go with a howl of pain, and I scrambled away, diving for my phone. My fingers closed around it just as the sound of sirens filled the air. The alarm I'd triggered must have alerted the authorities. The driver heard it too. He looked from me to the door, indecision clear on his face. Then, with a final curse, he ran to the front of the bus and wrenched open the door. I watched in disbelief as he disappeared into the night, leaving me alone on the bus. Moments later, police cars surrounded us, their lights painting the interior of the bus in flashes of red and blue. Officers boarded, their voices a blur as they asked me if I was okay, what had happened. As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what I'd just experienced hit me. I'd come so close to disappearing, to becoming one of those tragic stories I'd heard about but never truly understood. In the days and weeks that followed, as I gave statements to the police and tried to piece my life back together, one thought kept running through my mind. How many others hadn't been as lucky as me? How many had taken that last bus ride and never returned? I don't take the bus anymore. The night shift at the hospital feels different now, knowing what can lurk in the shadows of a sleeping city. But I'm alive. I'm here. And I'm more determined than ever to help those who find themselves in danger, whether it's in my ER or on a lonely street at night. Because sometimes the difference between safety and disaster is as small as a red button and the courage to press it. Story 11. The screech of tires on asphalt pierced the air as I swerved, narrowly avoiding a collision. My heart pounded in my chest, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. In my rearview mirror, a pair of headlights bore down on me, relentless and terrifying. What had started as a simple commute home had turned into a nightmarish game of cat and mouse on the freeway. And as the traffic light ahead turned red, I realized with growing dread that this game was about to reach its climax. My name is Daniel Foster, and I never thought a moment of careless driving would lead to the most terrifying encounter of my life. It was a Friday evening, and I was eager to get home after a long week at the office. The freeway was busy but moving steadily, the usual rush hour traffic starting to thin out. I was in the left lane, cruising along at a good clip, my mind already on the weekend ahead. That's when I made the mistake that would change everything. I glanced down at my phone just for a second to check a text from my wife about dinner plans. When I looked up, I realized with a jolt that the car in front of me had slowed down. I hit the brakes hard and swerved into the middle lane, cutting off a sleek black SUV in the process. The SUV's horn blared, long and angry. I winced, raising my hand in apology as I merged back into the left lane. It was a stupid move, I knew that, but I figured that would be the end of it. Just another close call on the freeway, soon to be forgotten. I couldn't have been more wrong. The SUV pulled up behind me, following so close I could barely see its headlights in my rearview mirror. I increased my speed a little, hoping they'd back off. They didn't. Instead, they matched my speed, staying right on my tail. "Come on, give it a rest," I muttered, glancing nervously in my mirror. The SUV's front grille filled my view, intimidating and aggressive. I switched lanes, hoping to let them pass. The SUV followed, still riding my bumper. My palms started to sweat as I realized this wasn't just an annoyed driver. This was something else entirely. For the next few miles, I tried every trick I could think of to shake them. I changed lanes repeatedly, slowed down, sped up. Nothing worked. The SUV stayed with me like a shadow I couldn't escape. My exit was coming up, but I was afraid to take it. What if they followed me off the freeway? I made a split-second decision to stay on, hoping I could lose them in the heavier traffic ahead. That's when things went from bad to worse. The SUV suddenly swerved into the lane to my right. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief, thinking they were finally going to pass me. Then, without warning, they veered sharply towards me, nearly sideswiping my car. I jerked the wheel, my tires screeching as I barely avoided a collision. My heart was racing, adrenaline surging through my veins. This wasn't road rage anymore. This was assault. I floored the accelerator, weaving through traffic in a desperate attempt to put some distance between us. But the SUV was powerful, easily keeping pace. In my mirror, I could see the driver now, a man, his face contorted with rage, one hand on the wheel and the other gesticulating wildly. I fumbled for my phone, trying to dial 911 while keeping my eyes on the road. But before I could make the call, I saw the exit for downtown approaching. Heavy traffic was backing up onto the off-ramp. I had a choice to make: stay on the freeway and hope I could outlast this maniac, or take my chances in the city streets. At the last possible moment, I made my decision. I cut across 2 lanes of traffic and shot down the exit ramp, earning a chorus of angry horns from other drivers. In my mirror, I saw the SUV attempt to follow, but it was blocked by the cars I'd cut off. I allowed myself a moment of hope as I merged onto the city street. Had I lost them? My relief was short-lived. As I stopped at a red light, I saw the SUV come barreling down the off-ramp, cutting off cars left and right. "No, no, no," I whispered, watching in horror as they pulled up right behind me at the light. I was trapped. Cars surrounded me on all sides, leaving no room to maneuver. In my mirror, I saw the driver's door of the SUV open. The man stepped out and my blood ran cold as I saw what he was holding behind his back. It was a tire iron gripped tightly in his fist. He approached my car with purposeful strides, his face a mask of pure fury. I hit the lock button, for all the good it would do against a determined attacker with a weapon. My mind raced, searching for a way out. The light was still red, but the cross-traffic was thinning. If I ran the light, I might be able to escape, but that would mean putting other people in danger. Could I live with myself if someone got hurt because of my actions? The man was at my window now. He raised the tire iron, and I knew I was out of time. I had to make a choice. Just as he swung the tire iron towards my window, I made my decision. I stomped on the gas, my tires squealing as I shot into the intersection. Horns blared and brakes screeched as cars swerved to avoid me. In my mirror, I saw the man stumble, caught off guard by my sudden movement. I weaved through the cross traffic, my heart in my throat as I narrowly avoided collision after collision. I took the first turn I could, then another, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and my pursuer. After a few minutes of frantic driving, I pulled into an alley and killed the engine, my whole body shaking. I sat there in silence, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. Nothing. Just the distant sound of city traffic and my own ragged breathing. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. As I waited for the operator to pick up, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had a simple mistake escalated so quickly into a life-threatening situation? The police arrived quickly, taking my statement and getting a description of the SUV and its driver. They promised to look into it, but warned me that without more information, there wasn't much they could do. As I finally drove home, hours later than I'd planned, I couldn't shake the image of that man's face, contorted with a rage so intense it had overridden all reason. What could drive a person to that point? And how close had I come to being seriously hurt, or worse? The events of that evening changed me. I became more cautious on the road, more aware of my surroundings. I never looked at my phone while driving again. But more than that, it made me realize how fragile the veneer of civility is that holds our society together. How quickly things can escalate. How easily a simple mistake can turn into a life-altering confrontation. In the weeks that followed, I found myself jumping at every black SUV I saw, my heart racing whenever a car followed me for too long. The police never found the man who chased me, and in some ways that made it worse. He was still out there somewhere. But as time passed, the fear began to fade, replaced by a newfound appreciation for life and safety. I started volunteering at a local driving school, sharing my story with new drivers and emphasizing the importance of patience and forgiveness on the road. Because in the end, that's what it comes down to. We're all just trying to get where we're going, all prone to making mistakes. And while I'll never understand what drove that man to such extremes, I can choose how I react to the inevitable frustrations of the road. Now, whenever I'm tempted to honk at a driver who cuts me off or tailgate someone who's going too slow, I remember that night. I take a deep breath, ease off the gas, and let it go. Because you never know what someone else is going through, or how a single moment of anger might spiral out of control. And as I drive home each evening, I'm grateful for every uneventful trip, every green light, every driver who waves me ahead with a smile. Because I know now, more than ever, how precious and fragile our everyday peace really is. Story 12. The app pinged and I swiped to accept the delivery request without a second thought. It wasn't until I saw the destination that a chill ran down my spine. Loading Bay 13 flashed on my screen. The address a series of numbers that made no sense. As the clock ticked towards midnight, I realized this delivery was about to take me somewhere I never should have gone. I'd been working as a delivery driver for about 3 months, trying to scrape together enough cash to pay for college. Most nights were uneventful, ferrying takeout to drunken college students or late-night office workers. But this night was different from the moment I clocked in. The app had been glitching all evening, sending me on wild goose chases across the city. Addresses that didn't exist, customers who claimed they never placed orders. By 11:30 p.m., I was exhausted, frustrated, and seriously considering calling it quits for the night. That's when the last order came in. The pickup was from a restaurant I'd never heard of in a part of town I rarely visited. But the payout was too good to pass up, easily triple what I'd make on a normal delivery. Despite the knot forming in my stomach, I accepted the job. The restaurant turned out to be a tiny hole-in-the-wall place tucked between a laundromat and a boarded-up storefront. The neon sign flickered weakly, half the letters dark. Inside, a bored-looking teenager handed me a plain brown paper bag, heavier than I expected. "What's in this?" I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. The teen shrugged. "Above my pay grade, man. Just delivering it to Loading Bay 13, that's all I know." I frowned. "Loading Bay 13? Where's that?" Another shrug. "Not my problem. Good luck." As I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The bag felt warm against my side, and I swore I could hear a faint humming coming from inside. But when I stopped to listen more closely, there was nothing but the ambient noise of the city at night. I pulled up the delivery address on my GPS, but it couldn't locate it. The numbers led to an industrial area on the outskirts of town, but there was no specific building or street listed, just Loading Bay 13 as the final destination. Common sense told me to cancel the order, to call it a night and head home. But the promise of that payout, and if I'm being honest, a growing sense of curiosity, pushed me forward. I started my car and headed towards the industrial district. As I drove, the city lights faded behind me, replaced by the looming shadows of warehouses and factories. Most of the buildings were dark, their parking lots empty. It was as if the whole area was holding its breath, waiting for something. My GPS beeped, indicating I had arrived at my destination. But all I saw was a sea of identical warehouses, their loading bays shut tight for the night. No signs, no numbers, nothing to indicate which one might be my delivery point. I cruised slowly down the rows, peering at each building. They all looked abandoned, windows dark, no signs of life. As I reached the end of the third row, I was ready to give up. This had to be a mistake or a prank. There was no Loading Bay 13. That's when I saw it. Set apart from the other warehouses, half hidden behind a screen of overgrown bushes, was a smaller building. Unlike the others, this one showed signs of recent use. A dim light shone from a single window, and the loading bay door was partially open. Above the door, barely visible in the gloom, was a faded number, 13. My heart pounded as I parked the car. Every instinct told me to leave, to forget about the delivery and the payout, but I'd come this far. I couldn't turn back now. I grabbed the paper bag and approached the loading bay. The quiet hum I'd noticed earlier was louder now, a steady vibration I could feel through the soles of my shoes. As I got closer, I realized the sound wasn't coming from the bag. It was emanating from the building itself. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast emptiness of the industrial park. "Delivery." No response. The partially open loading bay door loomed before me, a sliver of darkness beckoning me inside. I hesitated, then ducked under, telling myself I'd just leave the package and go. The interior of the warehouse was pitch black. The humming was louder here, a physical presence that seemed to press against my skin. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a space that defied logic. Instead of the expected warehouse interior, I found myself in what looked like an abandoned subway station. Crumbling tile walls stretched into the darkness. Ancient posters, their images long faded, peeled from the walls, and everywhere a fine layer of dust, undisturbed for what seemed like decades. "What the hell?" I whispered, my words swallowed by the oppressive silence. I swept my light around, looking for any sign of life, any indication of where I should leave the package. That's when I saw the figure. At the far end of the platform, barely visible in the gloom, stood a person. They were unnaturally still, facing away from me. As I watched, they slowly began to turn. Terror gripped me. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on something unseen. I fell, my phone clattering away, plunging me into darkness. The humming grew louder, filling my head, drowning out my panicked breathing. Scrambling to my feet, I ran blindly towards where I thought the exit was. My hands found the rough edge of the loading bay door, and I ducked under it, bursting out into the night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my lungs burning, heart threatening to burst from my chest. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced back at the warehouse. The loading bay door was closed. No light shone from the window. It looked as abandoned and unremarkable as all the others. Had I imagined it all? The subway station, the figure, the overwhelming hum. But then I realized the paper bag was gone. Somehow in my panic, I'd managed to deliver the package after all. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. With shaking hands, I pulled it out. A notification from the delivery app glowed on the screen. Delivery completed. Loading Bay 13. Tip, $1,000. I stared at the screen in disbelief. A $1,000 tip? For a delivery to whatever that place was? As the adrenaline began to fade, questions flooded my mind. What was in that package? Who or what had I delivered it to? And how could a subway station exist inside a warehouse in the middle of an industrial park? I started my car, hands still shaking on the steering wheel. As I pulled away from Loading Bay 13, I made a silent vow to never accept a delivery from this app again. No amount of money was worth the terror I just experienced. But even as I made my way back to the familiar streets of the city, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Whatever I'd stumbled into tonight, whatever strange world existed behind that loading bay door. I had a sinking feeling it wasn't done with me yet. The hum that had filled the warehouse seemed to linger in my ears, a constant reminder of the inexplicable thing I'd witnessed. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered a terrifying thought. What if the delivery wasn't bringing something to loading bay 13, but taking something or someone away? As I finally pulled into my driveway, the first hints of dawn lightening the sky, I knew sleep would be impossible. I sat in my car, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of the night's events. My phone buzzed again, another notification from the app. Thank you for your service. Your next delivery is scheduled for midnight tomorrow. Destination, loading bay 14. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. Then with trembling fingers, I deleted the app from my phone. As I walked into my house, locking the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there in the maze of warehouses and hidden subway stations, something was waiting. And sooner or later it would find me again. The delivery might be over, but I knew in my bones this was just the beginning of a much darker journey. Story 13. The ground opened up beneath me like the maw of some ancient beast, hungry for metal and flesh alike. One moment I was driving my usual route, the next I was plummeting into darkness, surrounded by the shriek of tearing steel and the roar of rushing water. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. For me, it was the faces of my wife and kids, smiling and oblivious to the fact that their husband and father was about to be swallowed by the earth. My name's Frank Doherty, and I've been driving garbage trucks for the city for nearly 2 decades. It's not a glamorous job, but it's honest work and it's allowed me to provide for my family. I never thought it would almost cost me my life. It was a Wednesday morning just past 5 a.m. The sky was still dark, that deep blue that comes right before dawn. I'd been on the road for about an hour, making my way through the sleepy suburban streets of Millbrook. The cab of my truck smelled of coffee and the lingering scent of yesterday's garbage. The radio was playing some old country song, barely audible over the rumble of the engine. I turned onto Elm Street, a road I'd driven 100 times before. The houses were all dark, their occupants still fast asleep. The only signs of life were the occasional cat slinking across a front yard or an early rising jogger. I was about halfway down the street when I felt it. A slight tremor, almost like driving over a speed bump. But there weren't any speed bumps on Elm Street. Before I could even process what was happening, the front of my truck dipped sharply. The steering wheel was suddenly useless in my hands, spinning freely as the tires lost contact with the road. My stomach lurched as the sensation of falling took over. In the split second before chaos erupted, I caught a glimpse of my rearview mirror. Where the road should have been, there was nothing but a gaping black hole. Then we were falling. The world became a cacophony of noise and motion. Metal screeched as the truck's frame twisted and bent. Glass shattered as the windshield imploded, showering me with tiny shards that stung my face and arms. The seatbelt dug into my chest, the only thing keeping me from being thrown around the cab like a rag doll. It felt like an eternity, but it must have only been seconds before we hit bottom. The impact was bone-jarring. My head snapped forward, then back, slamming into the headrest. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and for a moment everything went dark. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The engine had died and the radio had gone quiet. All I could hear was my own ragged breathing and a distant sound of rushing water. I blinked, trying to orient myself. The cab was tilted at a crazy angle, nearly on its side. Faint light filtered in through the shattered windshield, illuminating a scene of destruction. The dashboard was crumpled, bits of plastic and metal strewn everywhere. Pain made itself known then. My left arm was pinned between the seat and the door, and I could feel warm blood trickling down my face from a cut on my forehead. But I was alive. Somehow, impossibly, I was still breathing. That's when I heard it. A low, ominous groan of metal under stress. The truck shifted slightly, and I felt a surge of panic. We weren't stable. Whatever was holding us up could give way at any moment. I tried to move to free my trapped arm, but the pain was excruciating. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself to focus. I needed to assess the situation, to figure out a way out of this mess. Through the remnants of the windshield, I could make out my surroundings. We were in some kind of underground cavern. The walls were rough earth and broken concrete, evidence of the road and whatever had been beneath it. About 20 feet away, I could see water rushing by, a broken water main, probably. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We were in a sinkhole. The road had collapsed, taking me and my truck with it. And now we were precariously balanced, who knows how far underground, with water rapidly filling the space. I fumbled for my phone with my good hand, praying it had survived the fall. By some miracle, it was still in my pocket. The screen was cracked, but it lit up when I pressed the power button. No signal, of course, but maybe, just maybe, I could still call 911. My fingers shook as I dialed, leaving smears of blood on the screen. I held my breath as the call tried to connect. 1 ring, 2, 3. 911, what's your emergency? I could have wept with relief. My name is Frank Doherty, I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. I'm a garbage truck driver for the city. My truck, we've fallen into some kind of sinkhole on Elm Street. I'm trapped in the cab. There's water coming in. Please, I need help. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. She asked me questions. Was I injured? Could I see any street signs or landmarks? How fast was the water rising? I answered as best I could, fighting against the growing fog in my brain. Shock, probably, or a concussion from the impact. Help is on the way, Mr. Doherty, she assured me. Fire rescue has been dispatched. I need you to stay on the line with me, okay? Can you do that? I nodded, forgetting for a moment that she couldn't see me. Yeah, I managed. Yeah, I can do that. We talked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. She kept me focused, kept me from slipping into panic. All the while, I could hear the water getting closer, could feel the truck shifting and groaning around me. Then I heard something else. Voices, shouting, the sound of machinery. Frank, it was a new voice on the phone now. This is Captain Reeves with Fire Rescue. We've located your position. We're going to get you out, but I need you to stay very still. The ground is unstable, and any movement could cause further collapse. Do you understand? Yes, I said, relief washing over me. Yes, I understand. What followed was a blur of activity. I could hear the rescue team working above me, the sound of equipment and shouted orders. The truck creaked and shifted several times, each movement sending a jolt of terror through me. The water was at my feet now, cold and insistent. And then suddenly, there was light. A hole had been opened in the roof of the cab, and I could see faces peering down at me. Hands reached in, gentle but firm, carefully extracting me from the wreckage. The pain in my arm flared as they moved me, but I bit back the cry. I was getting out. I was going to live. As they lifted me clear of the truck, I got my first real look at the scene. The sinkhole was massive, at least 30 feet across. My truck was wedged at the bottom, half submerged in muddy water. If I'd been in there much longer, they strapped me to a backboard and began the process of lifting me out of the hole. As we neared the surface, I saw flashing lights, heard the murmur of a gathered crowd, and then finally, I was out. The sky above me was lightening with the approaching dawn, the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. As the paramedics swarmed around me, checking my vitals and preparing me for transport, I caught sight of a familiar face. My wife, Sarah, her eyes red from crying, pushing through the crowd. "Frank!" she cried, reaching for my hand. "Oh God, Frank, I thought I'd lost you." I squeezed her hand, ignoring the pain that shot through my arm. "Can't get rid of me that easy," I managed to joke, though my voice was weak. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I took one last look at the sinkhole that had nearly claimed my life. It was hard to believe that just an hour ago it had been a normal street. It was a stark reminder of how quickly life can change, of how fragile our world really is. In the days and weeks that followed, as I recovered in the hospital and later at home, I thought a lot about that morning, about how close I'd come to never seeing my family again, about the thin line between life and death, and how quickly it can be crossed. I'll go back to work eventually. The city needs its garbage collected, sinkhole or no sinkhole. But I'll never take another day for granted. Because now I know that every morning I wake up, every kiss, goodbye from my wife, every laugh from my kids, it's all a gift. One that can be taken away in the blink of an eye, or the opening of the earth. Story 14. The steam from the hot shower had barely begun to clear when the lights went out. One moment I was rinsing shampoo from my hair, and the next, I was plunged into total darkness. Then came the sound that made my blood run cold. the creak of the main door opening, followed by multiple sets of footsteps. I wasn't alone anymore. My name's Jake Holloway, and I've been driving big rigs across the country for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my fair share of weird stuff on the road, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night at the Sunrise truck stop just outside of Amarillo, Texas. It had been a long haul from Chicago, and I was beat. 14 hours behind the wheel will do that to you. When I pulled into Sunrise around 11 p.m., all I wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of shut-eye before hitting the road again. The truck stop was quiet, just a handful of rigs in the lot. I nodded to the sleepy-eyed cashier as I paid for a shower token, then made my way to the back where the facilities were. The shower room was basic but clean, a row of stalls with flimsy curtains for privacy, a bench for your clothes, and hooks for towels. I picked the stall furthest from the door, hung up my towel, and stepped under the spray of hot water. Man, it felt good. I could feel the tension of the long drive melting away as the water pounded against my shoulders. I closed my eyes, letting out a contented sigh. That's when everything went sideways. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. I froze, my hand halfway to my face where I'd been scrubbing away road grime. The sudden darkness was disorienting, but I figured it was just a power outage. These things happen, especially in older places like this. I was about to call out, ask if anyone else was around, when I heard it, the distinct sound of the main door opening. Footsteps followed, not just one set, but several. They moved with purpose, quiet, but not exactly trying to be stealthy. My heart rate picked up. Something about this felt off. Why wouldn't they say anything if they were just other truckers coming in for a shower? I stood stock still, water still running over me, straining my ears to hear over the spray. The footsteps spread out, moving down the row of stalls. I heard the soft thud of duffel bags being set down, then the unmistakable sound of zippers being opened. A whisper cut through the darkness, too low for me to make out the words. But the tone was clear, all business, no casual chatter you'd expect from a group of road-weary truckers. I needed to get out of there, and fast. But how? My clothes were on the bench outside the stall, and my towel was hanging just beyond the curtain. I'd have to reach out into the darkness to grab it, risking being seen or heard. As I stood there, paralyzed with indecision, a new sound reached my ears. The metallic click of what could only be a gun being cocked. My blood turned to ice. This was no random power outage, no innocent group of late-night showerers. Whatever was happening out there, it was dangerous, and I was trapped right in the middle of it. I forced myself to think. The shower was still running. Good. The sound might help mask any movements I made, but I couldn't stay here forever. Sooner or later they'd check the stalls, and I'd be a sitting duck. Moving as slowly and quietly as I could, I reached out and felt for my towel. My fingers brushed against it, and I almost sighed with relief. I wrapped it around my waist, wincing at every tiny sound the movement made. Just then, another whisper, closer this time. Check the stalls, make sure we're alone. Panic surged through me. I had seconds, maybe, before they'd find me. My eyes darted around the pitch-black stall, searching for any means of escape. That's when I remembered. The stall walls didn't go all the way to the ceiling. There was a gap, maybe 1.5 feet at the top. It was a crazy idea, but it was all I had. Bracing myself against the slippery tiles, I reached up, feeling for the top of the stall divider. My fingers found the edge, and I took a deep breath. With every ounce of strength I had, I pulled myself up. My arms strained with the effort, muscles I hadn't used in years protesting loudly. But adrenaline is a hell of a thing, and somehow I managed to haul myself over the top of the divider and into the next stall. I landed as softly as I could, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a thunderclap to my ears. I froze, certain I'd been discovered. "What was that?" a gruff voice asked. "Probably just the pipes settling," another replied. "This place is old as dirt." I let out the breath I'd been holding, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they must be able to hear it. I was one stall closer to the door, but still trapped. The sound of curtains being yanked open reached me. They were checking the stalls, moving down the line towards me. I had to move now. Summoning every bit of stealth I possessed, I crept to the edge of the stall and peeked out. In the faint light coming from under the main door, I could make out several dark shapes moving about the room. 4, maybe 5 men, all dressed in black. One of them was standing near the door, his back to me. If I could just get past him. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. It was now or never. With as much speed and silence as I could muster, I darted out of the stall and made a beeline for the door. I was halfway there when a shout went up. "Hey!" I didn't look back. I hit the door at full speed, bursting out into the hallway. Behind me, I heard the pounding of feet and angry yells. I ran like I'd never run before, my bare feet slapping against the linoleum floor. I rounded a corner, nearly wiping out as I slid on the slick surface. The cashier looked up in shock as I sprinted past the front desk, but I didn't stop to explain. I burst out into the parking lot, the cool night air hitting my wet skin like a slap. My truck was on the far side of the lot. I'd never make it before they caught up. A car engine roared to life nearby, someone leaving after a late-night fill-up. Without thinking, I ran towards it, waving my arms frantically. "Help!" I yelled. "Please help me!" The driver, an older woman, looked at me with wide eyes. For a terrifying moment, I thought she might drive off, leaving me stranded. But then she hit the unlock button and I dove into the passenger seat. "Drive!" I gasped. "Please, just go!" To her credit, she didn't hesitate. She stomped on the gas and we peeled out of the parking lot just as the group of men burst out of the truck stop. As we sped down the highway, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me shaky and nauseous. "What in God's name is going on?" the woman asked, shooting me concerned glances. I shook my head, still trying to process it all myself. I don't know. There were men in the shower room. They had guns. I think I interrupted something I wasn't supposed to see. She nodded grimly, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We'll go to the police station in the next town. They can sort this out." As the lights of Amarillo faded behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something far bigger and more dangerous than I could imagine. What were those men doing in a truck stop shower room in the middle of the night? What would have happened if they'd caught me? I never did get answers to those questions. The police took my statement, but without much to go on. I hadn't seen faces, couldn't identify voices. There wasn't much they could do. They increased patrols around the truck stop for a while, but as far as I know, nothing ever came of it. I still drive the long hauls, still stop at truck stops for showers and rest. But now I'm always looking over my shoulder, always aware of my surroundings. And I never ever take a shower without checking the locks twice and keeping a clear path to the door. Because out here on the open road, you never know what's waiting in the darkness. And sometimes the real danger isn't what's out on the highway, it's what's hiding in the places we least expect. Story 15. The moment I slid into the back of the patrol car, I knew something was terribly wrong. The seats were hard and unyielding, nothing like the worn leather I'd felt in the back of a police cruiser once before. But it wasn't the uncomfortable seating that sent a chill down my spine. It was the complete absence of door handles on the inside. As the officer slammed the door shut, the reality of my situation hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a routine arrest. This was something far more sinister. It had started as a normal Friday night. I was walking home from my buddy Mike's place where we'd been watching the game and having a few beers. I wasn't drunk, just pleasantly buzzed, enjoying the cool night air as I made my way through the quiet suburban streets. The patrol car rolled up beside me, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I didn't think much of it at first. Cops often cruised through our neighborhood, especially on weekend nights. "Evening, sir," the officer called out as he stepped from the vehicle. "Mind if I have a word with you?" I stopped, turning to face him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face hidden in the shadow cast by his cap. Something about his stance made me uneasy, but I chalked it up to the natural nervousness anyone feels around law enforcement. "Of course, officer," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is there a problem?" He took a step closer, and I caught a whiff of something odd, not the usual smell of leather and gun oil you'd expect from a cop, but something chemical and sharp. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I'm going to need you to come down to the station to answer a few questions." My heart rate picked up. "Suspicious activity? I don't understand. I'm just walking home from a friend's house." The officer's hand moved to his belt, resting on his holster. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Fear and confusion warred inside me. I hadn't done anything wrong, but the thought of resisting a police officer terrified me. Slowly, I turned around, my mind racing as I felt the cold metal of handcuffs close around my wrists. That's how I ended up in the back of this strange patrol car, my stomach churning with dread as I realized the doors had no internal handles. As the officer slid into the driver's seat, I leaned forward, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Officer, I think there's been a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong. Can you please tell me what this is about?" He didn't respond, didn't even glance in the rearview mirror. The car pulled away from the curb, picking up speed as we left my familiar neighborhood behind. I tried to focus, to think rationally. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe the car was just old, an outdated model without interior handles for safety reasons. But as I looked more closely at my surroundings, other details began to jump out at me. The partition between the front and back seats was solid with no sliding window. The radio was silent, no dispatcher chatter, no static, nothing. And the route we were taking, it definitely wasn't heading towards the police station. "Hey, I called out louder now. "Where are we going? This isn't the way to the station." Still no response. We were on the outskirts of town now, warehouses and abandoned lots replacing the neat suburban homes. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I shifted in my seat, trying to get a better look at the driver. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the back of his neck, just visible above his collar, was a strange mark. Not a tattoo, but something that looked almost mechanical. This wasn't a cop. I didn't know what he was, but I was certain now that I was in serious danger. Panic gave way to desperation. I began to thrash in my seat, kicking at the doors, the partition, anything I could reach. "Help!" I screamed, knowing it was useless but unable to stop myself. "Somebody help me, ah!" The car swerved suddenly, tires screeching as we left the main road. We bumped along what felt like a dirt path for a few moments before coming to an abrupt stop. The engine cut off, plunging us into silence, broken only by my ragged breathing. The driver turned slowly in his seat. In the dim light, I could see his face clearly for the first time. It was wrong, too smooth, too symmetrical. His eyes reflected the faint dashboard lights like a cat's. "Please remain calm," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Resistance will only make this more difficult." "Make what more difficult?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" A slight tilt of his head, almost curious. "Want? We do not want, we need. Your fear is inefficient, it taints the sample." "Sample?" The word sent a fresh wave of terror through me. Whatever this thing was, whatever it had planned for me, I knew I couldn't let it happen. With renewed desperation, I threw myself against the door, ignoring the pain as my shoulders slammed into the unyielding surface. To my shock, the door gave way. I tumbled out onto hard-packed earth, the impact knocking the wind out of me. For a moment, I lay there, gasping, unable to believe my luck. Then survival instinct kicked in. I scrambled to my feet, hands still cuffed behind my back, and ran. I had no idea where I was or which direction led to safety, but I knew I had to put as much distance between myself and that car as possible. The sound of pursuit came almost immediately. Footsteps, too quick and too even to be human, gaining on me rapidly. I veered off the path, plunging into a dense stand of trees. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the undergrowth, my lungs burning, muscles screaming for relief. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each second an eternity of terror. But eventually, inevitably, I began to slow. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, unable to break my fall with my hands still restrained. As I lay there, tasting blood and dirt, I heard the footsteps approach. Slow now, unhurried. I rolled onto my back, looking up at my pursuer through the tangled canopy of leaves. The thing that looked like a police officer stood over me, its head cocked to one side. In the faint moonlight filtering through the trees, its skin had taken on a metallic sheen. "Your attempt to escape was predictable," it said, its voice as flat and emotionless as ever, but ultimately futile. "Now shall we proceed?" I closed my eyes, bracing myself for whatever was to come. But instead of pain or unconsciousness, I felt a strange tingling sensation spread across my skin. When I opened my eyes again, the forest was gone. I found myself in a stark white room, lying on some kind of examination table. The handcuffs were gone, but I couldn't move, held in place by an invisible force. Around me, figures moved. Not quite human, not quite machine, their features blurred and indistinct. One of them leaned over me, its face a shifting mass of pixels. "Subject secured," it said, its voice a chorus of tones. "Beginning extraction process." As a strange device lowered from the ceiling, hovering over my chest, I realized with horrifying clarity that this was no mundane abduction. This was something far beyond my worst nightmares. The last thing I remember before the pain started was a single terrible thought. How many others had been taken like this? How many had encountered a patrol car with no handles, driven by something wearing a policeman's skin? And most chilling of all, would anyone even believe me if I survived to tell the tale? The extraction began, and with it my old life ended. Whatever I was when I woke up, if I woke up, I knew I would never be the same. The patrol car without handles had been just the beginning of a journey into a world I never knew existed. A world where the line between human and other blurred beyond recognition. As consciousness faded, one final thought flitted through my mind. Always check for door handles. You never know when that small detail might be the difference between safety and a fate worse than death.